at the time of this airing, we're coming up on a major tax deadline, and I thought it would be helpful if I could run through with you on this episode a few of the key tax deadlines that you should be marking in your calendar as a business owner so that you never get blindsided. I've heard so many stories from entrepreneurs saying that they didn't even know there was a tax deadline and that it kind of came up on them and they found out after the fact that they were supposed to be paying their taxes or filing their taxes. So we want none of that. Okay. We don't want that to happen to you. So I'm going to go through the major tax deadlines that you need to know, primarily the federal ones in the United States. Now, every state is going to be a little bit different in how they handle income taxes. So just know that most of the states follow the federal schedule. And there are some cases, in particular, thinking back to 2023, 2022, that we had some states shift around. So for example, Hawaii, with everything that happened in Maui, they got a little bit of an extension or they got a little bit of forgiveness in terms of the timeline. California as well, because of, I think it was a hurricane or a storm that happened there. They had some forgiveness on their timelines as well. So just understand that every state will be a little bit different in how the IRS treats them and also how their state governments treat them with regard to income tax deadlines. So knowing that there's a little bit of a nuance here, I'm going to cover the majority of what you need to know. And this should just provoke some curiosity in wanting to research the rest of the details. Okay. So I'm going to get you like 85% of the way there with these. And I need you to go and find out your unique state deadlines. Cool. Okay. So let's move on. Federal deadlines. Here's what you need to know. Mark the calendar. So we're going to work from the beginning of the calendar year forward. So March is a big month because March marks the deadline, March 15th, for a few things. You have to file your business tax returns, meaning the S corporations and partnerships. So, and this is where people get tripped up. If you have an LLC and you have more than one member, you have an entity that's taxed as a partnership by default. Unless you've made some other election, you have a partnership. And what a lot of people don't know is that means you have a March 15th tax deadline for the business return. Corporations, partnerships have separate returns than your personal. They have separate returns that have to be filed, and they're typically informational returns, like no taxes due with most of the types of returns. So March 15th is partnerships and S corporations. March 15th also marks the deadline to elect the S corporation for the upcoming year, if you would like to get it approved a little bit faster. You can do late elections, but you're more likely to get approved if you file that election before the March 15th deadline, and you have to provide less information, basically. So you can absolutely file later, like I said, but March 15th is ideal. So if you're thinking in 2024 that you want to elect the S corporation, and we'll make sure that in the show notes that you have links to the episodes where we talk about that. But if you think you may want to do that, I would encourage you to make sure you file that before March 15th if you can. Now, that's March 15th. Now we can get into April 15th. April 15th is pretty well known as the individual tax filing deadline. What you may not also know is that the C corporations have this deadline. Aha, so there's an exception, right? The C corporations now have a April 15th deadline as well. And here's why. I'm just going to give you a little bit of insight, like why the March and the April. Because a lot of business owners own an S-Corp or a partnership. So what they did was they said, okay, in March, your partnership or S-Corp return is due. And then you're going to pull a page out of that called the K1. It's actually like 3 pages, but you're going to pull that out and you're going to use that to file your individual return. So they can't have them all due on the same day. That would be unfair to, frankly, us as tax pros. So what they did was they said, it's going to be due a month earlier. You have to make the business return, get the K1, and then we'll report the K1 on your individual returns so you can pay your taxes. So that's how it works. So if you can mark your calendar for March 15th, you're going to want to have that ready to go so you can do your individual taxes. 415 is the individuals and S-Corps, but 415 is also, this is the unfortunate part, it's also the first installment of estimated payments for 2024. So that means that you also have to be chipping in toward your 2024 tax payments. Now, I have a different philosophy on this. I personally do not always recommend paying the first installment of estimates, especially if you owe from the back year. because that's more of a priority. If you owe taxes for 2023, you should be paying them by April 15th, and that should be the priority. So if you don't have a ton of extra cash to be chipping into prepaying 2024, don't worry about it. You got some time to catch up. So it's probably the lower priority estimate to pay in my opinion. But I do recommend that if you have the cash available and you are profitable and you plan to be profitable, that you can contribute something into that as well. But 415 is when your first voucher is due. And if you do not pay that voucher, if you don't pay the amount by the date, then you could incur an underpayment penalty for that as well. So just keep that in mind. Now, so on the topic of estimates, the next installment of estimates for individuals is on June 15th. This is another one. So here's the funny thing with estimates. I'm just going to give you the 4 dates: April 15th, June 15th, September 15th, January 15th. And if you're going, Shannon, that is not equal spacing. It's not. It makes no effing sense. You got 2 months in between the first two, and then it's like 3 months, and then it's like 4 months. So don't worry about it. That is just how they've done it. That's the rhythm. So it's April, June, September, January. And it would be the 15th of the month, guys. All of these deadlines, when I say the 15th, it's the 15th or the closest weekday after. So if the 15th lands on a Saturday or a Sunday, it is the Monday. And if the Monday happens to be some type of holiday, it is the Tuesday. That has happened a couple times. So just keep that in mind, that it's the closest weekday after, the closest business day, I guess you'd say, after the 15th of the month. But I'm going to say the 15th just to be all encompassing. So here, your estimated tax deadlines are really out there to help you chip in and pay your vouchers for what you're going to owe for the upcoming year. It's a way of creating some type of installment plan to prepay. So hopefully you'll be able to implement that and have enough cash flow to do so. Now, let's get into the extended tax deadlines. We already talked about there's a 315 deadline for businesses that are S-Corps and partnerships. There is a 415 deadline for C-Corps and individuals. We're good there, right? So now both of those can file 6-month extensions. And that is the extension of what? The paperwork, not the payment. We've said that so many times on the show. The paperwork, not the payment. So you are still supposed to pay what you owe on those original 315 and 415 deadlines, but you don't have to file the paperwork until 6 months later. And again, if you're thinking, Shannon, that makes no effing sense. How do I know what to pay if I haven't done the paperwork? Exactly. Just do it all before the original deadline if you can. And that will be just so much easier on everybody. But here's the thing with the extensions. You're going to get the 6-month extension. And here's what will typically happen. I'll be honest with you. I'm going to give you a heads up right now. If you have not experienced this by now, we're approaching the October 15th deadline right now. And this is why it's a scramble, because the October 15th deadline is the deadline by which you need to file your extended individual and C-Corp tax returns. And if you are in a position now where you're like, crap, I haven't even filed my 2022 yet, you got about, I think, 3 more days. I think it's on Monday. So if this is airing on a Friday, it's on Monday. And I want you to keep that in mind, that, like, not to scare you, not to make you scramble, but it's due on Monday. Your homework's due on Monday. So I'm giving you a little bit of a heads up here. So if you haven't talked to your accountant yet about doing that, we got to get on that. But also, you can incur some penalties if you don't meet these deadlines in terms of not filing on time. You're not going to jail. Nothing's going to happen. Don't worry. You're just going to get hit with a little bit of a penalty. It happens. And it's kind of that, like, slap on the wrist, like, please don't do that again. But it's not massive. Like, we're talking about a couple $100, I think, per month per shareholder for S-Corps. And then there's a slight penalty for individuals as well. But it really comes down to encouraging you to pay on time and to file on time. And quite frankly, there's really no excuse why you shouldn't. Now, I understand that stuff happens, life stuff happens, family stuff happens. That excluded, you should be able to, other than not making it a priority, you should be able to file on time. And I would encourage you to meet these deadlines if at all possible. So just to recap, we've got 3 different types of deadlines that I've kind of gone over. It's the individual tax deadline and its extension. So we got 415 to 1015, and we've got the 315 to 915 extension for businesses that are S-Corps or partnerships. We went through the 4 estimated tax installments, which is April, June, September, and January. And then we also went through the S-Corp election deadline of March 15th. So there's a lot going on and a lot of reasons to be keeping up with these deadlines. You can kind of tell that there's kind of always a deadline looming. Welcome to our worlds. There's always a deadline looming and there's always something kind of going on, except between roughly October 15th and the end of the year. So you'll notice that there's this kind of this lull from October 15th until the end of the year until, we get into the tax season. And that's somewhat intentional. That's when the IRS kind of slows down, the holidays come up, and the accountants will take time off and they'll be in this kind of like lull in between the two seasons. That is a primary time, as I've mentioned on prior episodes, that is a primary time to get your tax pros secured. That is a primary time to get your what together and to get your stuff organized so that you can give it to your pro and to just get your numbers in order in general, because you're going to be hitting such a busy time after the holidays that this is really the prime time to take action and to utilize what you learned from your past tax filing to implement into the future. So those are the key tax deadlines I want you to know. If you know nothing else, know those deadlines and be aware of them, mark the calendar, and always, talk to your accountant, have an open dialogue and conversation on what is expected of you so that you can meet those deadlines with plenty of room to spare.